Serious former gang members, what made you leave? Has your past ever come back to haunt you? Personally, I ended up getting out cause I realized the pattern I was falling into. Before I even turned 18, I had 6 charges on my record, 2 of them felonies, and I was on third strike, which basically means if I commit another violent crime I can be locked away for life automatically, and any non-violent crime, no matter how small it is, can be an automatic 7 years if they choose. As of right now, since my charges were all between the ages of 13 to 16, I've been told if I don't get in trouble for the next 10 years after my last charge, 2013, I can get my records expunged, so that's what I'm aiming for at the moment. But it's crazy knowing any little thing can send me back for such a long time because of how stupid I was as a teen. A lot of my friends never got the chance to get out. One of my friends is doing 12 years, he's been in there since he was 17, and another one is doing life, so I'm just glad I got out before that happened, but I still have to be careful. Used to have a very serious drug problem, coupled with the fact I grew up in a rough hood, it was inevitable. Basically I needed protection and drugs. But like most people here are pointing out, eventually you just get too old for that shit. Kicked my drug habit several years ago, found an amazing girl and realized I didn't have to stay in such a dangerous spot. We moved out to the mountains, and aside from my police record and my ongoing struggle with addiction, I left those demons back in the city. For real though, you can leave your hood so easily if you want to. Took me so long to realize that. Age in the family. You cannot be in a gang and live a family life at the same time. At some point you literally get too old for that shit. So at what age is not normal for a normal gang? I'd guess 35. In crime statistics, about 25 is when your chances of committing crime fall drastically. Got older and seemed stupid. Felt stupid representing a group of 7th grade dropouts. I wanted to represent myself. The ones that aren't dead or in prison still live with their parents, and all they have going for them in life is that red bandana. I rolled into a neighborhood in Atlanta, everyone was in all red and white, I was in my blue car with a blue shirt and hat and sneakers. I realized I'd made mistakes I'd never thought to consider that morning. A couple of 3 things. A. Got too old for that shit. B. Joined the army. And C. Realized, thankfully not too late, almost shooting a mother ducker dead for talking shit to my boy wasn't in my best interests long term. I think back to that point and thank Duck I did not do something so dumb. Cringy. Brazilian here. I was a teenager in the mid-2000s. Used to hang with a lot of other kids who were also low middle class and had a lot of time and liberty to be on the streets causing havoc. A lot of them were hooligans. In Brazil, hooligans are really common in major cities with big football teams, but it's somewhat different from those in Europe. People hang in the torcidas organizadas, wear uniforms, sometimes carry guns and fight over petty shit with people from other torcidas. The main goal is to beat and steal the other crew's materials, like shirts, hats, flags and this kind of shit. It's not uncommon to see people die over this ridiculous nonsense. Anyway, it was a large gang, but no one did heavy stuff, like killing people, even though sometimes someone was packing a revolver or a pistol. At least I never heard of something like that. We used to beat the crap out of other people from other hoods, though. Some of us were really violent. A lot of my friends trained martial arts just for the sake of kicking people's ass on the street. I stopped hanging around because some of my friends got arrested for attempted murder, and they just didn't give a single duck even after jail. Some of them also sold weed, and I'd begun to wake up to the fact that shit was getting more serious. I had a lot of doubts before, after seeing people get wrecked over nothing. Like, random street fights were common. I saw a couple of random dudes getting their heads stepped on, noses exploded, teeth broken, people threatening others with fire weapons. I chose to focus on school, and years later I'm a lawyer with no criminal background, thankfully. My friends from that time are doing okay, I guess. They are alive, and I think that's a good thing, considering what they used to do and how many enemies they made. I'm sorry if I made any grammar mistakes, I'm Brazilian and rarely write in English. Going to prison and seeing that the guys I wanted to be like were scared and cowardly as well as easily manipulated with no honor. Edit. As for my past, I have been able to do whatever I set out to accomplish in life. However, having to explain my criminal past after every DOJ background is a pain in the ass, and at this stage quite embarrassing. Even though I was just 18 years old when I was last arrested, I still have to explain myself to people as if it was yesterday. Most people don't truly understand the weight of a committed sentencing. Losing all aspects of freedom drains the soul scarily fast. Watched a dude die. He raped my friend's sister, so it's not like he was the best dude ever, but still pretty traumatic. I wouldn't necessarily call it a gang, but basically I used to hang out with a bunch of criminals, burglars, drug dealers. They even pulled some extortion on people I knew. I was this skinny 18-year-old nerd just there to smoke some weed while these people would sometimes walk in with stolen TVs, pounds of weed and crack. I met them through a mutual friend I knew growing up. He dropped out of high school and never did anything to improve while I had started a career. I was a college dropout. By the time I started my job I just ghosted him and basically everyone else I knew. At that point, I had only been hanging out with people I smoked with, which was like 2 to 3 people, completely, and don't see any of them anymore. We all live in the same borough so we sometimes cross paths, but they don't really say much. I never got in any fights, but I was in a constant position where if we got pulled over by the cops, I would have ruined my life. At one point I had such terrible anxiety when driving my legs would shake uncontrollably. My entire body was shivering in the middle of July. Getting a phone call would trigger my anxiety as it probably meant we were going somewhere. I still deal with anxiety today and also some pretty bad overall depression. In junior high, I used to hang out with Ds. I grew up with them. When they were JRS, I dated a few, partied with them, hung out and played kick the can, etc. We weren't full-fledged teens yet, so we just got to be silly kids. Fast forward 2 years, 15-ish, and they had to get jumped in, sell coke, carry straps, protect the block, and I stopped hanging out with them. 2 or 3 of them would still come to my house to hang out and I could tell they weren't fond of their new expectations. They would call the cops on their own gang activity so they could take a day off and claim it's too hot. When I brought over my new high school friends and they all met, they fit in fine. They could have been regular kids. But the pressure became apparent when we would make plans and they couldn't come with the beach, pools, Six Flags, etc. There were days that the whole gang went and that was out of protection. They did go out with us once in a while and to me it was so normal. They were just a little older but still the same goofy kids I grew up with. They didn't gangbang around us, they didn't challenge anyone's affiliations, they didn't charge us for the weed. They could have been regular teens. Fast forward 2 more years and the full-fledged boys in blue and black had dropped out, started hanging out with older gang members and proving themselves. I had already stopped talking to them, but heard from the grapevine that 1 was killed, 2 in jail for attempted murder, and 3 running from a warrant for an armed robbery. They became the stereotype, misogynistic, ignorant, rude, crimey dudes you ignore like bums. All because older dudes took advantage of them in their willingness to prove themselves. They were decent kids at first. They didn't leave, the gang left them. When I was 14 I became involved in a criminal organization. It wasn't street crime, it was organized crime. They looked down on street crime but for things they were also guilty of. When I was 16 one of my best friends was beaten to death. That was the first thing that made me think that this wasn't something I could do forever. After that, the whole thing kind of just broke down. The walls closed in and a few people had to leave the country and the ones of us that stayed tied up the loose ends and rolled up our thing into the major thing and called it a day. Psychologically it was that I was making the world a worse place. That was the thing that for me made me want to stop. I didn't want to contribute to the suffering in the world and in people's lives, and I was. I made my family miserable, my old friends were scared of me. My new friends didn't like me because I was always lashing out, and there were people I'd wronged for no reason. There was one time I beat a guy so badly he was in the hospital for weeks, but he owed money, so later in the week I had to go to his house and collect it from his wife, and just the look on her face and his daughter's face. I was thinking, I did this? I'm the reason you're going through this. And it just wasn't okay with me. My past has never come back to haunt me. There are times when somebody will say something, but even when I run into people I had disagreements with, but we just go our separate ways. I used to be a big brother in a certain chivalrous organization. There were a combination of factors for my departure. Chief among them was that I had a serious problem with the newer generations and how they perceived power, and quite frankly, I grew tired of those that joined our ranks who were from the newer generations. They did not understand basic concepts of honor, respect, or dignity, which added pressure to an increasingly volatile territorial issue that we were facing. They didn't seem to understand that violence was only meant to be a tool, not just the way we handled every interaction with everybody that we encountered. We filled a niche that law enforcement weren't traditionally able to accommodate, but there was obviously a darker side to our work, and some people were neither mentally nor psychologically capable of handling the dual nature of our existence in society. There was, what I'd consider, a huge war that erupted a few decades ago when one of the bosses of a large chivalrous organization had passed away naturally of a heart attack. This left a power vacuum that wasn't meant to stay empty because of the ambitions of several men who felt that it was their right to step up and fill that absence. Long story short, there were many of us who were killed and seriously injured. I was shot several times during all of this but managed to survive. At this point, I decided that I had had enough. I had been learning English, Russian, and German, working on becoming fluent in those languages, which was very difficult. During the chaos of the fallout of what had happened, I grabbed my rainy day fund and fled the country to live abroad. Since then, I have lived simply, without the ostentatious displays of wealth and power that I had been accustomed to. I hated every minute of it initially and wept bitterly over the loss of my possessions, my lifestyle, my brothers, my home. I now work as a baker, living a much simpler, but more satisfying, life, and I am raising a daughter. I stay away from nightlife, which is incompatible with my work hours and trying to be a responsible parent. I don't drink or smoke anymore. I am friendly with the people I work with and with customers, but I never talk about myself, preferring instead to ask them questions about themselves. People will tell you anything if you show interest when they talk about themselves, which was one of the key tools I learned back in my past life. So far, no repercussions from my past as far as I can tell, which is more than what I deserve if I'm being honest. I imagine someday everything will catch up with me. But I want to shield my daughter from all of that as much as I can. I want her memories of me to be favorable. I want her to believe that I am a boring person who has banal routines and simple pleasures. I used to chill with, redacted, very renowned US gang, who grew up together, because they were nice guys to me, and they had great drug prices. Plus, who doesn't want real, 30-year-old gang members to have your back when you're a friendless minority? I'm white, going to an extremely low-income high school. I remember coming home, and homie being in my house doing nothing except scraping his grinder with a pocket knife. He also had his pistol on the table. That's pretty obnoxious even today, like bro, I know you're a shooter. You don't gotta flex on me like that. I can still hear him today, bet you didn't expect to come home and see that. Motions to gun, did you? Bro, I totally expect that at this point. And this guy, Gangster 1, would always get pissed drunk and tell me that I don't know shit about life or God, while also crying to me about people he's killed. I try to empathize, but this becomes a chore when you hear it several times per month. Gangster 2 was the pusher. Most quality shit in town. These guys would hang out together since childhood. So I would go over to number 2's house, who's also 30 and has been in the game 20, and just get amazing drugs while listening to them tell me who they pulled up on. Kids walking around in blue in their neighborhood, so he warns them with strong words. He sees them in a bigger group a couple minutes later, and pulls his AK on them, and tells them they need to leave now. Anyways, this was all great fun for me as a kid/young adult. But then there was this fight, and my brother was involved. He was hanging out with them in a bar fight, then a shootout broke out. My brother tells me he fought, but the gang members later came over to the house and chided him for disappearing during the fight. There were people shot, and Gangster 1 and 2 hopped in their cars and continued the shootout with the other gang while they were driving. Anyways, it was then that I realized that my brother shouldn't have to apologize for running from that situation, which I believe he did. Duck getting shot over some dumb shit like that. So it was kind of then that I realized that I could get pulled up on if I was hanging out with these guys. I broke ties. They weren't extremely happy. They frequently knocked on my door and talked to me about how what I'm doing isn't cool. But they never assaulted or threatened me, so I really believe that they were literally being as nice as they possibly could. Anyways, I stopped talking to them about 5 or 6 years ago, when I moved to another town. Sometimes I talk to them on Facebook though. Some of the friends I made though them ended up murdered by rival gangs, not because of me. It's really hard, man. It really makes me see how pointless shooting, and really, violence in general, is. Oh yeah, I also got a shotgun pulled on me. Like, the dude cocked it and aimed right at me. In public. And the cops never showed up after they were called. So that wasn't awesome. Anyways, I might have put too much info on here, so if I'll keep this up. Let me just say to you youngs. It's really not worth it to bang. Like, at all. You can make like a few $100 extra per week, but you can also just get shot for some dumbass reason. I was shot by the Denver police 3 times, twice in the chest and 1 in arm. It was definitely a wake-up call. I spent a year in jail recovering it. 1 bullet missed my heart by 1 inch. When I got out I knew shit had to change. I was 25 years old still ducking up. Had some kids got a solid job and just stuck with it. My mom grew up in a bad neighborhood. Her 2 older brothers had joined a gang in their teens. Everyone kind of knew her because of them, and they all respected her, because if a guy has street cred, you don't duck with his baby sister. Anyways, the brother closer in age to her was gunned down in the late 80s. After that she decided to cut ties with everyone she knew in that lifestyle. Today, her older brother is still around, and he is a ducking mess. Pushing 50 with a history of drugs. He's homeless, no family, in and out of trouble. Goes to show that life has nothing to offer. Thanks for listening to another episode of Reddit X. Subscribe and activate the notification bell so you won't miss any stories. Feel free to share your own stories below in the comments. Have a good day.